Ladies and gentlemen, what's next is the question that Nor-Shipping asks us now, and the panel that you will soon hear will talk about the global trends, both in the market but also in the surrounding circumstance of geopolitics. Let me first start, as the other speakers, by congratulating Nor-Shipping on its 50th anniversary. It's a great event, an important place to meet and take stock. And right now, as we already heard in the early interventions, we have a volatile market. We have a significant change coming in the economic sphere, and that's also definitely true for the global geopolitical scene. And I will start by saying that the main message that will be my takeaway message to you is that we are again living in a world characterized by strategic competition between key players. What does that mean? I'll try to give you a 50 seconds recap of the last 25 years of history. Many of you will remember the Cold War when most of us grew up. Then we had strategic competition between the US and Western-led world and the Soviet-led empire. And it was clear to everyone that politics would trump trade, trump economy, if there was a question. Where you traded, with whom you traded, where you would invest, where you would receive investments from, was secondary to what was the global competition between these two systems. That's gone, and that's not coming back. The Cold War is not coming back, and anybody who says that, in my view, are wrong. However, something else is happening. But let me go to the second phase. In the meantime, we lived for a short while, 20, 25 years, in an era of unipolarity or semi-unipolarity. It means that a world was strongly dominated by Western economy, by Western political players, by Western-inspired norms. And as the Cold War receded, we finally saw globalization actually happening. Globalization for more or less everyone. Old adversaries turned into friends and partners. China joined the World Trade Organization. Russia and Europe started to deal with each other. And basically, the world was coming together, economically speaking. Our security concerns, and those of us who come from the security background, our concerns shifted 180 degrees. We used to be concerned about states that worked, but were on the other side. Then we started, when in the early 90s, we learned that the problem wasn't any longer states that were actually working well, but states that were collapsing. We saw the massacre in Rwanda, we saw the wars in the Balkans, we saw a lot of weak states leading to all kinds of asymmetric challenges. And even as a Norwegian, when we were watching Russia, it was not only that the Soviet Union was gone and Russia had arrived, but it was actually, rather than fearing Soviet nuclear submarines that worked, we started to be concerned about all Soviet nuclear submarines that did not work any longer and had become an environmental concern. So it's a very different scenario. Fast forward to today, the world is again characterized by a number of strategic competition theaters. I'll mention three. There are many more. One of them is obvious to everyone who reads the press. It's the one between Russia and Europe, Europe and NATO, EU, over Ukraine, which is not really about the Ukraine, but where Ukraine is the primary theater. It's a shooting war. Not long ago, a lot of people thought that wars in Europe was impossible. It would never happen again. Well, it did. Strategic competition is back in Europe. Second one, obvious to everyone, is the Middle Eastern theater. The Middle East is two things. It's chaos, but it's also competing orders. The easy part to see is the chaos. Breakdown, failed states, weak states, new alternative projects like the so-called, quite badly named Islamic State, with a lot of true Muslims think has nothing to do with Islam, but still that's their autodomination, or Daesh, as I prefer to call it. But behind this, or on top of, or linked to all this chaos, we also have competition between well-organized states who know what they're doing and who are trying to exploit the current drama in order to move their goalposts in their direction. That could be some of the Gulf states, and it could be Iran. and there are also other players involved in that theater. And interestingly, since this is such complex to us in the West, we chose to side with both sides. So we're helping Iran and Iraq and Syria, and we're helping the Gulf states in Yemen. So it's interesting. So we're involved in that dramatic theater as well. But the third one, and the most important one, even if it's maybe the least dramatic right now, it doesn't take lives, it's no or very little shooting, but the very important one is the one that is taking place in East Asia and Southeast Asia, which is where we're looking for how to accommodate a rising China, how China itself is finding its way into becoming, from being a large developing country to be the second or eventually the first global economy, already the first exporter, a major player in the economic field, which the success of which was only possible because China actually chose to enter into the world that the West had created by joining Western institutions and accepting a basic liberal capitalist premise, but still competition around how to deal with that. I just come here from Singapore, where the annual Shangri-La dialogue was held. Shangri-La is an annual conference between basically defense ministers and security experts from all over the world, but focusing on East Asia. And what really struck me, I've been there a number of times last year, the rhetoric was very dramatic. I felt that the tone in the Prime Minister Abe or the people from the People Liberation Army in China or the US Secretary of Defense was very conflictive last year. And a lot of people felt that this is not looking very good. This year, the tone was better. But last year, probably the rhetoric was worse than reality. Today, unfortunately, my sense is the rhetoric was better than reality because no problem has actually been solved. How do we make sure that in this changing power relationship in East Asia, we will still be able to guarantee freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight? How do we deal with the law of the sea convention questions? How do we make sure that we get a peaceful agreement around the management and rules applying particularly to the South China Sea, but also to the East China Sea, in the place where actually people, countries led by China, but not only China, are not any longer, as we used to say in the security world, establishing facts on the ground, but actually building the ground itself by taking underwater reefs and turning them into islands, and then later claiming them as territory and sovereign territory, putting air bases, air defense system on these islands. Highly complicated, highly conflictive, and it's very, very important to understand that we are living in a world where strategic competition is back, where it is still relevant. That's potentially dramatic, and it has a lot to do with the future of globalization. As I said, it was the end of the Cold War that opened up for real globalization. I think most people in this room would agree with me, and I have work in the World Economic Forum. We think that globalization is principally a good idea. It connects people, it brings opportunity to everyone, even if we are fully aware that it also creates another set of challenges, some of which were mentioned by Sturla Henriksen, like rising inequalities and so on. But the question now to watch is, will globalization be able to continue, or will politics again trump the market, trump trade, trump investments? Somewhat concerning, somewhat dramatic. But I want to leave you on a good note, though. There's some reason for optimism. And the reason for optimism is, and why I said when I started that the Cold War is not coming back, this is actually not an ideological competition between systems. Everyone involved, all the key players, key economies, are, at the end of the day, aware that there is much more to gain from competition than from confrontation. So we may be just going through a transformative stage, a transformative phase, and a new equilibrium will be found. But it matters to what everybody here does. It matters to who buys what. It matters to how much they buy, who sells to whom. It matters to where the trade flows goes. It matters to where's the oil and energy flows. One interesting observation, of course, and I'm coming to an end here because I'm following this watch. One interesting observation here is that Middle Eastern oil used to go west to America, to the west. Now that tide has clearly changed. It's now going east. China, India, the rising powers in the east are becoming much more dependent on Middle Eastern energy, at least until some energy revolution happens there. And that probably means that they have to be more aware and more concerned and more engaged in what's happening in that part of the world, whereas America may choose the option of becoming less engaged and focus on other areas. And my final point, which I would like you to recognize as cross-cutting everything, and it was mentioned by Admiral Zukunft earlier today, is cyber. Everything today is cyber. It's cyber too. Any future conflict, every single future conflict you will see will be a cyber conflict. It may also be a physical conflict, and sea, air, land, space, but it will always be a cyber conflict. And any strategic competition that takes place on a more physical level will also happen in cyberspace. So as we become more connected, just be aware that's a domain which is at least as important as air and land, and maybe, if I may say in this room, maybe even on par with the sea. Thank you for the attention.